The ambush that broke an empire. The men who cracked the code never fired a shot. In the spring of 1942, in a windowless basement beneath Pearl Harbor, known simply as the Dungeon, a team of exhausted cryptanalysts worked in rotating 20-hour shifts, surrounded by cigarette smoke and coffee cups, chasing fragments of a 5-digit Japanese naval cipher called JN-25B. Their leader, Commander Joseph Rochefort, hadn't left the building in days. He was closing in on something big, a Japanese operation aimed at a target the intercepts only ever called RF. Rochefort was almost certain AF meant Midway. Almost wasn't good enough for Washington, so his team set a trap. Midway's garrison was ordered to send an uncoded radio message complaining about a broken freshwater distillation plant. 2 days later, a Japanese transmission reported that AF was short on fresh water. The guess was confirmed. 6,000 miles away, in the wardroom of the carrier Akagi, Imperial Japanese Navy officers had no idea their own confirmation signal had just handed their enemy the exact date, the exact strength, and the exact intentions of the largest fleet Japan had ever sent to sea. An empire convinced of its own invincibility, by June 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy had not lost a major engagement in 6 months of war. Pearl Harbor had crippled the American battle line. Singapore had fallen with roughly 85,000 British and Commonwealth troops taken prisoner. The Dutch East Indies, Burma, and the Philippines had all gone the same way. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, now assembled an armada built to finish the job. 4 fleet carriers under Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, 11 battleships, dozens of cruisers and destroyers, and more than 200 vessels scattered across a diversionary strike on the Aleutians, an invasion force bound for Midway itself, and Yamamoto's own battleship group trailing behind. The plan, Operation MI, rested on a stack of assumptions that Japanese intelligence had never seriously tested. American carriers were believed to be somewhere in the South Pacific, still recovering from the mauling both sides took at Coral Sea. The carrier Yorktown, hit hard in that battle, was assumed to need 3 months in dry dock. Radio silence, Japanese planners believed, guaranteed total surprise. Not everyone was convinced. Nagumo's own Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, had warned in staff conferences that the operation scattered Japanese strength across too wide an ocean, violating the basic principle of concentrating force. He was overruled. The fleet that had never lost saw no reason to doubt itself now. What the Japanese didn't know, every one of those assumptions was wrong. Station Hypo wasn't just reading fragments of Japanese traffic. By late May, Rochefort's team could reconstruct roughly a fifth of it, enough to piece together Nagumo's order of battle, his approach routes, and his timetable down to the day. Commander Edwin Layton, Admiral Chester Nimitz's intelligence officer, would later tell Congress that American planners knew Japanese intentions with enough precision to predict which ships would be where and when. And Yorktown wasn't 3 months from action. She was 3 days from it. Workers at Pearl Harbor, by some accounts over 1,000 of them, swarmed the damaged carrier around the clock from May 27th to the 29th. Patching a hole blown through her flight deck and welding over ruptured fuel bunkers well enough to get her to sea. Repair crews were still aboard, still working as she sailed to join the fight. Japanese naval planners, who required weeks for comparable repairs, had no framework for understanding what American shipyards could do under pressure. Armed with that intelligence, Nimitz made his move before a single Japanese lookout spotted anything unusual. He positioned Yorktown, Enterprise and Hornet northeast of Midway, precisely the one-quadrant Japanese search patterns were least likely to cover. Dawn, June 4th. At 4:30 a.m., Nagumo launched 108 aircraft against Midway's airfield, 36 Kate bombers carrying land attack bombs, 36 Val dive bombers, and 36 Zero fighters as escort. Alongside them went a thin scouting effort, 7 search planes in total, 5 float planes catapulted from the escorting battleships and cruisers, and 2 Kates covering the most likely direction of an American approach. It was a search built for an enemy Japan didn't expect to find. One of the 7, launched from the cruiser Tone, lifted off roughly 30 minutes late after catapult trouble. That half hour would matter more than almost anything else that morning. American radar picked up the inbound raid at 5:53 a.m. Every flyable aircraft on Midway went up to meet it: Marine fighters, torpedo planes, dive bombers, even Army B-17. The defense was scrappy, uncoordinated and outmatched. But the Japanese strike leader, Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, radioed back that Midway's defences hadn't been knocked out and a second strike was needed. That message put Nagumo in an impossible position. His reserve aircraft sat armed with torpedoes and armour-piercing bombs, held back in case American ships turned up. With no enemy fleet reported, he ordered them rearmed with high-explosive bombs for another run at the island. Deck crews scrambled to swap ordnance under time pressure, and in the rush, torpedoes and bombs pulled from the planes were stacked on the hangar decks instead of being struck back down to the magazines, a shortcut that would prove catastrophic. Then, at 7:28 a.m., the late scout plane from Tone finally radioed a sighting: 10 surface ships, bearing and range given, ship types unspecified. Nagumo now faced an agonizing question. Was this the American fleet he'd been told couldn't be there? He demanded clarification. It took 30 minutes to get an answer, and by the time it arrived, confirming a carrier among the ships. His hangar decks were cluttered with live ordnance, and his flight decks were caught mid-changeover. 6 minutes. Between roughly 9:20 and 10:20 a.m., 3 squadrons of American torpedo bombers found the Japanese carriers and attacked without fighter cover. It was close to a massacre. The obsolete TBD Devastators, lumbering along at barely 120 knots, were cut apart by Zeros that could fly nearly 3 times as fast. Torpedo Squadron 8 off the Hornet lost all 15 aircraft. Only one man, Ensign George Gay, survived, watching the rest of his squadron die from the water below. Torpedo Squadron 6 off Enterprise lost 10 of 14 planes. Torpedo Squadron 3 off Yorktown lost 10 of 12. Not a single torpedo hit its mark. But the sacrifice worked, even if no one planned it that way. Every Zero fighter had been pulled down to sea level to deal with the torpedo planes, leaving the sky above the Japanese carriers wide open. At 10:22, dive bombers from Enterprise, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, arrived overhead almost by accident. McCluskey had searched past his intended intercept point, guessed that a lone Japanese destroyer racing to catch up with the fleet would lead him to the carriers, and followed it north. He found the decks of Akagi and Kaga crowded with fueled, armed aircraft, and no fighter cover above them at all. The attack lasted minutes. A single bomb from Lieutenant Richard Best punched through Akagi's flight deck and detonated in the hangar amid the stacked bombs and torpedoes, setting off a chain of secondary explosions the crew never contained. Kaga took 4 hits in quick succession. At almost the same moment, dive bombers from Yorktown found Soryo and turned her into an inferno in under 20 minutes. Of the 41 American dive bombers that attacked, only 3 were shot down. In roughly 6 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 fleet carriers were doomed. The reckoning Akagi burned through the night. Captain Taijiro Aoki stayed aboard trying to save her until Yamamoto himself ordered her abandoned near 2 a.m. on June 5th. Japanese destroyers finished her with torpedoes before dawn. She went down with 267 dead. Kaga's fire mains had been shredded in the first hit, leaving her crew almost nothing to fight the blaze with. She was abandoned that evening and exploded before sinking, with 811 killed, the heaviest toll of any of the 4 ships. Soryu burned for 9 hours before going down the night of the 4th. Her captain, Ryosaku Yanagimoto, chose to stay aboard and was last seen on the bridge as she sank. Her losses came to 711. Hiryu, the one carrier untouched in the morning attack, launched 2 counter-strikes that mortally wounded Yorktown before American dive bombers caught her that afternoon and put 4 bombs into her. She sank the following morning. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi and Captain Tomeo Kaku both remained aboard as she went down. Hiryu's dead numbered 416. Yorktown, for all the damage she had absorbed, refused to sink easily, a testament to how seriously the US Navy trained crews in damage control and firefighting. She stayed afloat for 2 more days before a Japanese submarine, I-168, put 2 torpedoes into her on June 6th. She finally went under the next morning. When the totals were counted, the United States lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, around 150 aircraft, and roughly 307 sailors and airmen. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, a heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, and something closer to 3,000 men, including some 110 veteran aircrew, whose combined flight experience Japan had no fast way to replace. Why it mattered more than the ships. A 2006 declassified NS study of the code-breaking effort concluded that no naval operation in history had ever been fought with one side holding such a complete picture of the other's plans in advance. Nimitz himself later called Midway, in essence, a victory of intelligence. The United States knew Japan's intentions, strength, and schedule down to fine detail, while Japan knew almost nothing of the American side of the board. Yamamoto aboard the battleship. Yamato, some 300 miles behind his stricken carriers, considered a night surface action with his battleships once he learned the scale of the disaster. His staff calculated they could reach the American fleet by 2 a.m. Without air cover and with American carriers still intact and waiting for daylight, the risk was judged too high. Just before midnight on June 4th, Yamamoto cancelled the operation and ordered a withdrawal. The first time in the war, a Japanese offensive had been called off because of enemy action rather than completed as planned. The damage went well beyond 4 sunk ships. Japan's pre-war pilot training pipeline produced roughly 100 new naval aviators a year. The United States, even before Midway, was training around 2,500 a month. The veterans lost at Midway men who in some cases had been flying combat missions since the war in China began in 1937, could not be replaced on any timeline that mattered. Emergency wartime training compressed what had been roughly 2 years of preparation into a matter of months. And by 1944, some Japanese pilots were reaching squadrons with barely 100 flight hours against American pilots, averaging 600 or more. 2 years later, at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, that gap showed up in the numbers. Japan lost 346 aircraft against 30 American losses in an engagement US aviators, nicknamed the Marianas, Turkey Shoot. Production told the same story. From Midway to the end of the war, Japan completed 12 carriers. The United States completed 141. Japan's wartime economy, built on a national income roughly a 17th the size of America's, simply could not outproduce, outtrain, or outrepair an opponent that could rebuild a damaged flagship in 3 days and turn out new pilots faster than a battle could kill them. The historian's correction, modern research, most notably Jonathan Parshall and Anthony Tully's 2005 book Shattered Sword, has quietly dismantled several popular myths about that morning. The long-repeated claim that Japanese carriers were 5 minutes from launching a strike when the American dive bombers arrived doesn't hold up against Japanese operational records, which show a coordinated launch would have needed 30 to 40 minutes at minimum. The idea that Nagumo should simply have launched whatever aircraft were ready, rather than waiting to mass a full strike, ignores that Japanese doctrine simply didn't practice piecemeal attacks. And the notion that Japan's reconnaissance failure was just bad luck misses the point entirely. A 7-plane search covering that much ocean wasn't an accident. It was the plan. 4 days after it began, the battle was over. Japan would keep fighting for 3 more years. But the initiative, the ability to choose where and when the next battle would be fought, never returned to the Imperial Japanese Navy after the morning of June 4, 1942.